corruption, betrayal, and a dark fate. Today, we delve into the brutal and shocking stories of corrupt police officers who paid the ultimate price for their crimes, executed without mercy within the unforgiving walls of Mexico's most dangerous prisons. These men, who once swore to protect and serve, ended up facing their own death sentence. If you are fascinated by true stories of justice done by force, prepare yourself for an intense and disturbing journey. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to support our work and ensure you don't miss the next videos. Your interaction helps keep this content alive and vibrant. Now, adjust the volume and take a deep breath, because what comes next is not for the faint of heart. Story number 1, Alejandro Torres, 29, Guadalajara, Mexico. Alejandro Torres grew up in Santa Cecilia, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Guadalajara. Since he was little, his environment shaped his worldview. His childhood was marked by nights without electricity, shootings on the block and the constant presence of drug trafficking. Despite this, Alejandro dreamed of leaving that reality. He watched the police officers in the area with a mixture of admiration and fear. To him, they were not just authority figures, but people who exercised control over life and death, something that, deep down, he desired. At the age of 21, Alejandro entered the police academy, where he stood out for his agility and skill in combat strategies. He quickly rose through the ranks, but soon realized that the system was as corrupt as the world he had left behind. Their superiors accepted bribes, manipulated evidence, and often worked side by side with the very criminals they were supposed to combat. Initially, Alejandro resisted, but the need to adapt and the desire for power led him to give in. For years, Alejandro has built an ambiguous reputation. For some, he was a dedicated police officer; for others, he was a traitor, a man who used his uniform as a shield to commit crimes. His relationship with the Los Dragones cartel began in 2018, when he accepted his first bribe in exchange for ignoring an arms trafficking operation. From then on, his life changed drastically. He lived in a luxury apartment, frequented expensive nightclubs and boasted a lifestyle far beyond what his salary could afford. In March 2022, a joint operation by the public ministry and the federal police dismantled part of the Los Dragones network. Alejandro was identified as a key player in the scheme. On April 12, 2022, he was arrested at his home in the Providencia neighborhood. During his arrest, Alejandro tried to negotiate, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. His transfer to the Guadalajara Central Prison was immediate, a place he knew well, not as an inmate, but as a police officer who delivered targets to the local bosses. Guadalajara's Central Prison was a heartbreaking sight. Built in the 1970s, the complex was in ruins. High walls with barbed wire surrounded the place, but it was clear that the real strength was not in security, but in the rules imposed by the inmates themselves. As soon as Alejandro got out of the transport van, he felt the weight of the other prisoners' gazes. Many recognized him; he was the police officer who had arrested them or, worse, betrayed them. He was led through the narrow, stuffy corridors to cell 34. The smell of urine and mold was unbearable, and the heat made the environment even more claustrophobic. The cell, designed for 4 people, housed 8. Alejandro was forced to share the space with Raul, a thief known for his cunning; Ignacio, a burly man linked to the rival Los Dragones cartel; Esteban, a former accountant convicted of fraud; and 4 more men who seemed to watch Alejandro's every move like predators. For the first few nights, Alejandro tried to remain invisible. He slept little, with his body tense and his ears attentive to any sound. In the cafeteria, he ate quickly and returned to his cell before anyone had a chance to provoke him. But rumors spread. Inmates whispered his name in the hallways. The traitor in uniform was the nickname that followed him like a shadow. On April 18, Alejandro witnessed his first execution inside the prison. While sunbathing, a prisoner was attacked by 5 other men. The sound of screams and the blood smeared across the floor were recorded in his mind. He knew it was only a matter of time before he was the next victim. In the cell, Ignacio started asking questions. "You were a police officer, weren't you? How many times have you arrested an innocent person to protect your own?" he asked, while the other inmates stared at him. Alejandro tried to talk away, but Ignacio wasn't the type of man to accept evasions. The tension grew every day. On the night of April 20th, Alejandro woke up with a note on his bed. "You will sink." The words were written in charcoal, and the meaning was clear. He knew it was a warning, but he had nowhere to run. On April 22nd, at 3 a.m., Alejandro was woken up by Raul, who claimed that a prisoner in the corridor was feeling ill. Alejandro hesitated, but before he could react, he was attacked from behind. Ignacio and Esteban grabbed him by the arms, while Raul tied his legs with straps made from sheets. He was dragged back to his cell, where a horrific scene awaited him. In the center of the cell, an old, rusty chair was positioned. Alejandro was tied up tightly, and Ignacio initiated what he called a popular court. "You destroyed families, arrested innocent people and betrayed even your own men," Ignacio said. Alejandro tried to argue, but every word was met with punches and laughter. The torture began with superficial cuts on Alejandro's arms and face. Raul brought a bucket of fresh cement that they had secretly prepared. They forced Alejandro's head into the bucket, holding him down as the cement hardened. On the morning of April 23rd, guards found Alejandro's body. His torso was bent over the chair, and his head, solidified in cement, was a grotesque monument to the brutality of that place. The case was registered as internal conflict, and no investigation was opened. At Guadalajara's central prison, Alejandro Torres became just another victim in a system where justice is served at the hands of inmates. Story number 2, Miguel Salgado, 42, Tijuana, Mexico. Miguel Salgado, nicknamed El Lobo, was a police officer with a long history of abusing his power. From his early years on the Tijuana police force, it was clear that he did not see the badge as a symbol of justice, but as a tool for control and extortion. Miguel quickly learned that to thrive in the system, he needed to be willing to make deals behind the scenes, even if it meant destroying lives in the process. Born in a small town close to the border with the United States, Miguel grew up observing the inequalities that shaped the region. At a young age, he decided that the only way to escape poverty was to enlist in the police. Throughout his career, he gained a reputation for his brutality, especially in operations in Tijuana's poorest neighborhoods. He led violent raids, confiscated the goods of small traders and terrorized entire communities. However, it was his involvement with the Los Armas cartel that turned him into a figure feared by colleagues and civilians alike. The relationship with Los Armas began in 2015, when Miguel accepted a bribe to ignore a large arms trafficking operation that would cross the border. From then on, the payments became regular, and Miguel quickly settled into a luxurious lifestyle. He drove imported cars, frequented expensive restaurants and boasted wealth that was impossible to justify with his police salary. His power grew as he became indispensable to the cartel, providing information on police operations and even eliminating rivals when necessary. Everything changed in February 2022, when a federal operation dismantled part of the Los Armas network. The investigation revealed the extent of Miguel's corruption, including recordings, messages and financial transactions that directly linked him to the cartel. On February 15, he was arrested at an upscale restaurant in downtown Tijuana. Although his arrest was discreet, news quickly spread. Miguel maintained his arrogant stance, believing that his connections could still save him, but this time, he was alone. On February 17, Miguel was transferred to the La Mesa Maximum Security Penitentiary, known for its overcrowding and virtually non-existent control by guards. Upon crossing the prison gates, Miguel realized that his life was hanging in the balance. Many of the inmates he had helped imprison or betrayed for the benefit of Los Armas were there, and most of them recognized him immediately. The shouting and swearing began as soon as he was escorted through the hallways. "Traitor, cartel dog," they said. Miguel was assigned to cell 19, a cramped and unsanitary space. The walls were covered in mold, and the smell of sweat and urine was suffocating. He shared a cell with Antonio, a bank robber with an explosive temper, Javier, a 24-year-old convicted of murder, and Daniel, a silent and calculating man, who rarely took his eyes off Miguel. The first few days were of constant tension. Although none of his cellmates spoke directly to him, the looks were enough to make him understand that he was not welcome. In the cafeteria, Miguel tried to blend in, but whispers and dismissive looks followed him wherever he went. While sunbathing, he remained close to the guards, but he knew he couldn't count on them for protection. The prison hierarchy was controlled by the prisoners, and Miguel had no allies. On the 5th day, he found a note on his bed: "You will pay for what you did." Miguel pretended to ignore it, but he couldn't sleep that night. Every noise in the hallway seemed like a prelude to his execution. He knew it was only a matter of time before someone decided his presence was no longer tolerable. On the 7th day, a group of prisoners approached Miguel in the courtyard. Among them was Ramon, a tall, muscular man who controlled much of the trafficking inside the prison. Ramon looked directly into Miguel's eyes and said, "In here, your uniform is worthless. Neither does your cartel." Miguel tried to argue, saying he was there to serve his sentence like everyone else, but Ramon just laughed and replied, "Do you think you have a choice?" Later that night, Miguel was approached by another group of prisoners who pretended to want to help him. They invited him to participate in a card game in the recreation room, saying it would be an opportunity to relieve tension. Desperate for some kind of alliance, Miguel accepted. During the game, the men seemed friendly, but there was something unsettling about their smiles. In the middle of the match, one of the prisoners pretended to have a seizure, attracting the attention of the guards. Miguel tried to help, but before he could react, he was surrounded and forcibly taken to the bathroom. The environment was damp, dark and smelly, with water running down the walls. There, Ramon and his group revealed their true intentions. They tied Miguel to a rusty chair and began torturing him with electric shocks using a makeshift cable. With each discharge, they forced him to confess his crimes. "How many innocent people did you arrest to protect your friends? How many families have you destroyed for money?" Miguel's screams echoed through the bathroom, but no one would come to help him. The torture lasted more than an hour. When his body no longer reacted, Ramon ordered his corpse to be hung in one of the showers, simulating suicide. They cleaned up the place and returned to their cells as if nothing had happened. The next morning, guards found Miguel's body. The scene was quickly recorded as death due to personal causes, and no investigation was opened. Inside La Mesa, however, everyone knew that Miguel Salgado was no longer El Lobo. He had become just another forgotten story in the corridors of that hell. Story number 3, Luis Arriaga, 36 years old, Ciudad Juárez, Mexico. Luis Arriaga was a man of ordinary appearance, but his reputation preceded him. With 15 years of service in the Ciudad Juárez police, he was known both for his violent methods and his behind-the-scenes influence. For years, Luis led controversial operations that aimed to arrest members of small criminal groups, while secretly collaborating with the region's largest cartels. He used his power to extort local traders, plant evidence against innocent people and ensure the protection of drug shipments crossing the border towards the United States. Everything changed in March 2022, when a federal police operation dismantled a human trafficking network operating in the region. At the center of the scheme was Luis. Investigations revealed that he facilitated the transport of women and children to the United States, receiving a percentage of the profits. The case shocked public opinion, and Luis became the target of protests and death threats. On March 25, he was arrested and transferred to the Ciudad Juárez State Prison, where his life was about to change forever. The prison was a place where official justice had no place. Controlled by gangs and dominated by violence, the climate was suffocating and oppressive. Luis knew that his entry into that hell would not go unnoticed. As soon as he arrived, guards escorted him through the corridors while the other prisoners looked on with contempt. Some whispered his name, while others shouted insults. "Traitor, corrupt," they said. Luis tried to ignore it, keeping his head up, but his haughty posture only increased the inmates' anger. On the first night, Luis was placed in cell 42, a cramped and dirty space that he shared with 5 other prisoners. None of them spoke to him, but the looks were enough to convey their intentions. He tried to sleep, but every sound in the hallway made his heart race. The feeling of being watched didn't leave him. On the second day, during sunbathing time, Luis was surrounded by a group of inmates who accused him of treason. "How many lives did you destroy while filling your pockets?" asked one of them, a tall, muscular man called El Cazador. Luis tried to argue, saying he was there to pay for his mistakes, but his words were met with laughter and shoves. The following days were a game of survival. Luis avoided direct confrontations, but he knew he was being watched all the time. The whispers about him intensified, and small incidents began to happen. Once, his food was thrown to the floor before he could eat it. Another found her bed covered in rubbish. Despite this, the guards did not intervene. In fact, many even seemed encouraged by the hostile climate. On the night of April 1st, everything changed. After curfew, while the guards were distracted by a false alarm in the courtyard, a group of prisoners from the next cell managed to open a hole in the partition that connected the cells. Luis, exhausted, did not notice the movement until it was too late. He was ripped from his bed, gagged and tied back to the mattress with straps made from sheets. El Cazador led the group. With a cold expression, he began to enumerate the accusations against Luis. "You stole from the poor. Protected the rich. He betrayed his own men. Today, you will pay for this." Each sentence was accompanied by murmurs of approval from the other prisoners. Luis tried to scream, but the sheet over his mouth muffled his sounds. The execution was planned in macabre detail. Using an improvised razor, El Cazador began carving words into Luis' body. "Traitor" was written on his chest. "Corrupt" on his forehead. With each cut, Luis writhed in pain, but the inmates held him tightly. When blood began to stain the mattress, one of the inmates poured water to clean the floor, as if he were handling a professional job. The torture lasted for hours. When Luis no longer had the strength to react, El Cazador ended the ritual with a fatal blow to the neck. The silence that followed was disturbing. The inmates watched the motionless body for a few seconds, before dragging it back to the center of the cell. They left him there, with his arms open and the words carved as a warning to anyone else who dared cross their path. When the guards arrived the next morning, the scene was grotesque. Luis' body was tied up, with the mattress soaked in blood and the inscriptions clearly visible. The sight made even the most experienced guards hesitate. The case was registered as an internal conflict, and none of those involved were punished. Inside the prison, Luis' death was celebrated as an act of justice by the inmates, but to the outside world, he was just another statistic in a broken system. At the Ciudad Juarez State Prison, stories like Luis's were common. However, its execution, meticulous and full of symbolism, became a reminder to all who dared to think that corruption could protect them within that place. Luis Arriaga, the man who once commanded fear, became a victim of the same forces he had helped create. The stories you just heard are not just narratives of violence, but grim portraits of how corruption and betrayal can lead to despair and terrible fates. These dirty cops believed their actions would never have consequences, but inside prisons, the rules are different, and justice takes brutal and merciless forms. If you liked this video and want to continue exploring real and impactful stories like these, leave a like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next content. Share this video with anyone you know who also likes impactful stories. Together, let's grow this community that isn't afraid to face reality. Thanks for watching, and until next time, if you have the courage to come back.